so far, Joshua's story has been, for the most part, it's been positive. If you remember, Joshua was kind of appointed the leader of the nation, and he took Moses' place. And really, so far, the story has been Joshua kind of leading the people from victory to victory. He has had a very successful career. It's been up and to the right, is one way to say it. And for the most part, Joshua's story is supposed to illustrate for us what it looks like when you do good things, when you make good choices, and life goes right. And hopefully, if you follow Jesus for an extended period of time over the course of a couple years, you have some experiences and some seasons just like that, where you do good things and life goes good. But that's not always the experience. Hopefully, that is the experience sometimes, where you start reading your Bible, you engage in church, and you notice that your relationship with God, it is improving, and you feel closer to God, and you're hearing his voice more, and all those kinds of things. But sometimes we don't always do the good things or the right things that we either know we're supposed to do or we just choose not to do. Sometimes, because we're humans, we do the wrong thing or the selfish thing, or to use biblical language, we do the sinful thing. And my guess is that, all of us in here, we're going to respond to our own sin differently. For one thing, most of us are going to, we're going to sin, or we're going to do wrong things, selfish things in different ways. For some of us, it looks like gossiping behind people's back and, trying to tear them down to make ourselves feel better. For others of us, it looks like, lashing out in anger or giving into temptation. All of us are going to kind of struggle at times where we do things that God forbids. We do things that either dishonor God, dishonor ourselves, or maybe even dishonor other people. And when we do those things, the way that we respond to ourselves, again, it's going to differ depending on our personality. For some of us, you have probably experienced doing some things. Let's call it sin. You've made some choices, you've committed some actions, and you felt really bad afterwards. You felt like you had regret. Perhaps you struggled with shame, or you kind of felt this sense of condemnation. You were really, really bothered with yourself. For others of us, we're okay with a little disobedience every now and then. It's like, not that big of a deal. However you respond to your own sin, however you kind of respond to moments where you choose to do something that God forbids, our passage this morning is going to give us an illustration. It's going to give us an illustration of sin. It's going to give us an illustration of disobedience. And it's going to give us an illustration of how God responds to all of it. If you remember from last week, we looked at Joshua chapter 6, where the nation was marching around the walls of Jericho, and God ended up performing this miracle on behalf of the nation. And the walls of Jericho come crumbling down, and the Israelites get their first victory, and they didn't really have to do much. They just had to follow God's orders. So they're kind of on a high coming out of chapter 6. And then the way chapter 7 starts throws a little bit of a twist into the story. So we'll throw up Joshua chapter 7, verse 1, and we're going to kind of make our way through chapter 7 this morning. It says, "But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan," who is our main character for the day, Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah. Pro tip, if you're ever at a Bible study and you have the portion where you have to read some of the difficult names, or if you show up on Wednesday and you get assigned the reading and you have to read the difficult names, just fake it, dude. Just literally just read right by it. No one's going to correct you. Took some of the things. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now, notice how the way the story starts is it says the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. We did not read this part of chapter 6 last week, but in chapter 6, God told the Israelites they were not supposed to take the gold and the silver and the plunder or the spoils of war. We don't talk like that anymore, but those are words for that stuff. They were not supposed to take the treasures that were in Jericho to enrich themselves. We'll show you the actual passage from chapter 6. I forget the verse number. I think it's verse 18. Yes. God said, "Keep away from the devoted things." It's that same phrase. "So that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you'll make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury." So the context is helpful here. Remember that God was using the nation of Israel to bring judgment on the other nations. That's the whole reason why, that's part of the reason why Israel is moving into the promised land, and God is using them to expel the other nations from the land. And because of that, God didn't want them to enrich themselves from their victories because he wanted to make it very clear, you guys are not some superstar nation that is just winning all these battles. This is not a regular military raid where you just go and you benefit yourselves at the expense of other people. That's not what this was. This was God literally taking a group of people and saying, I'm going to provide for you, I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to use you for a specific purpose. And because of that, God goes, so you can't enrich yourself here. I just want you to trust me. I don't want you to take the gold and the silver that you see in this land. I don't want you to do that because I want you to trust that I'm going to provide for you as he has been doing. But the story wouldn't be exciting without someone doing the thing they're not supposed to do. So this is why chapter 7 opens up and addresses the challenge. The Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things because a guy named Achan took some of them, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Everything was going good, and then Achan is going to be the guy who ruins it. So just try to imagine the person in your life who ruins everything, put their face on Achan. That's this guy. Because if God was going to use the nation of Israel to bring judgment on the other nations, this part is important. The nation of Israel could not have the same sin and the same immorality as the other nations. Otherwise, God is just playing favorites. But God's goal was to shape a people who literally followed his ethic, his code of conduct. They lived the way humans were intended to live, and then that's why God was going to use them to kind of show the world how they were supposed to live. But Achan here, he steals something, and he lies about it, and he hides it. And as a result, God essentially removes his hand of blessing and protection on the nation. And here is what happened, chapter 7, this is verse 2. It says, Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth Aven to the east of Bethel, and he told them, go out and spy out the region. So the men went up and they spied out Ai. So kind of similar to the way the story has played out so far. They're about to take some land. They send some spies out. Hey, go look at it, get a scouting report, come back, tell us what you see. When they returned to Joshua, they said, not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. Hey, you know the way that we needed all of, the nation to march around Jericho? We don't even need that. This is a small group of people. We can send out our JV team. We're going to be good. So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai. In other words, they were defeated, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. And at this, the hearts of the people melted in fear, and they became like water. And after this defeat, Joshua immediately starts to panic and to pray because he's both scared and confused. Not that long ago, Joshua was leading the people doing laps around fortresses, and the fortresses were crumbling down. Joshua has been very confident that God has been with them. He has observed how God provides and protects. And now they can't even win a battle where they have more people than the enemy. So Joshua knows something is up. Something is different because when God was with us before, the outcome was very different. And now I don't know what's going on. So he prays and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And here is how God responds. The Lord said to Joshua, stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They've taken some of the devoted things that they've stolen. They've lied, and they put them with their own possessions. This is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and they run because they've been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. All kinds of observations that we can make from that text. But I want us to focus on verse 12 for a moment. The phrase, that is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. Joshua is trying to figure out, God, where are you? Why have you lifted your hand of blessing off of us? And as God is designating and kind of identifying the problem for Joshua, God says, because you sinned, you will not be able to stand against your enemies. And I think it's interesting that God uses that phrase and he doesn't use other phrases. All major Bible translations, they use that some form of that same phrase, that the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. God does not say, hey, as long as you guys have hidden sin, as long as you guys are living in immorality, you're not going to have any fun. you're not going to enjoy life, you're not going to smile, you're going to live lonely. Like he doesn't say any of that. But what he does say is as long as there's hidden sin, you're not going to be able to stand against your enemies. And I actually think that's a very good description of a life that is lived in sin or a life that is lived apart from God. Because I've been around church for a little while now, and I have observed that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we can make we can make living in the world, we can make sin sound like it is the most horrible thing on the face of the planet. I have heard people share their testimonies and they'll kind of make a clear distinction between, when I was living in the world and when I was sinning and when I was living apart from God, I was miserable, I was lonely, I was addicted, I was ashamed, I had guilt. Like they'll make it sound like it was the worst experience of their life. And then they go, but now that I'm saved, like I don't have any of that. And I honestly think that when people are sharing their story, that's their story. That is how they experienced it. So I'm not going to debate that. But I have a unique vantage point as someone who gets to pastor young people because I get to see young people who, for the most part, kind of grow up in a Christian environment. And then when you graduate, you turn 18, you have a lot more freedom than you probably did beforehand. And I get the opportunity to see young people who can make decisions to walk away from God. Maybe not consciously or not with like this adversarial spirit, but just the decision to say, you know what, there were some things that I was not allowed to do back then that I'm going to try doing. I want to experiment with. Whatever kind of sin they choose to do, however they choose to remove themselves from following Jesus or being loyal to their convictions, I have seen young people who have made the decision like, you know what, I'm going to kind of walk away and I'm going to enjoy this life or this lifestyle and I'm not really going to feel bad about it. Like I'm going to go try these other things. And here's the thing, like I'm just telling you the truth. Sometimes I have seen young people who walk away from Jesus or they just get so comfortable with a certain sin and their life is fine. They're okay. Like they just kind of keep on living and they're living apart from God, but like they're still happy and they're still smiling. And for the most part, everything seems okay. And the reason I think that's important to acknowledge is because if we only have an idea of living in the world as like it's the worst thing ever, and then you try it and you like it, you're gonna be like, dude, those people lied to me. Like they were holding something back. And as a matter of fact, the Bible even gives you the admonition, like the Bible even says, Hebrews, I think it's chapter 11, might be chapter 10, Hebrews, somewhere in there, verse 25, that sin is pleasurable for a season. Like the book that is designed to inspire us to follow God gives us the caveat, hey, but sin is pleasurable for a season. Like you can choose to go do that if you want. And yet what God says is, okay, but you're not going to be able to stand against your enemies. If you remember, God has a purpose for the nation. It is that they become a people who can show the rest of the world what God is like. They can reflect his goodness. They can share his love and his generosity to others. And what God does say is he says, hey, as long as you have sin, you will not become everything I have destined for you to become. You will not be able to experience everything that I have to give you because you are choosing something else besides me. And honestly, at a fundamental level, that's what sin is. Sin is us choosing something else besides God. In any relationship, there's always going to be some sort of kind of code of conduct. If you and me have a friendship, I don't have a lot of demands on my friends. One of them is try not to punch me in the face. Like, just don't do it. If you punch me in the face, I'm not going to want to hang out with you that much on a regular basis because you violated the code of conduct in our relationship. And in a relationship with God, he has a code of conduct. He has a way of life that he has designed for us. So when we violate it, when we sin, it's us saying, I'm going to choose this instead of my relationship with you. And that's exactly what Achan does in our story. He ends up choosing sin or the gold and the silver instead of the nation's relationship with God. And Joshua has to conduct an investigation. He finds out that Achan has stolen some of the stuff from Jericho, and he ends up having a confrontation with Achan. Here is the scene from chapter 7, verse 19. It says, then Joshua said to Achan, my son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me. And Achan replied, it's true. I've sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and I took them. And they're hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. If you notice that phrase, verse 21, he says, when I saw in the plunder, and then he describes what he saw. He goes on to say, I coveted them and I took them. Covet is a Bible word, doesn't get used a lot outside of Christian contexts. For the super Christians in the room, you might remember that the command to not covet is the 10th of the 10 commandments. Here's how it's said in Exodus chapter 20. It says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servants, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Some translations will use the word desire right here instead of covet. So they'll say, don't desire your neighbor's stuff. And I think that's helpful, but it can also be misunderstood because the Bible doesn't say that desire is bad. Desire is a part of the human experience. As a matter of fact, there are things that we are supposed to desire, such as the spiritual gifts manifesting in our life, or the Bible says it's good to desire offices of leadership. But the Bible also teaches something else. And it's that our desire can lead us into self-destruction if we don't have self-control. Our desire can lead us into self-destruction if we don't have self-control. Again, the premise is not that desire is bad. Desire is not wrong. But without self-control, we can lead ourselves to places that we never intended to end up. To give you an example, a desire for a romantic relationship, it's not bad. I actually would argue that God gave us desires for companionship and intimacy and all that stuff. But if a desire for a romantic relationship doesn't have self-control, we will end up entertaining conversations with people who aren't actually good for us. We'll end up compromising on certain convictions just to keep people in relationship with us, or we'll stay in a toxic relationship just because we're afraid of being alone. A desire for friendship, for companionship, for fitting in and having a group of friends, that's not a bad thing. But without self-control, without some guardrails and some boundaries, our desire for friendship might cause us to completely become different people, to fake it just so that other people will like us and will hang out with us, or we'll put ourselves in situations that are not good for us just because we really want to fit in. Or there's the desire to just have fun, which again, I would say God put that there. But if the desire to have fun and to have positive experiences leads us into a lifestyle where we're just chasing the next high and we're willing to put ourselves in dangerous situations just in the name of fun, we might be exercising a desire without any self-control that can lead to self-destruction. And this is what happens to Achan. He makes a decision. Even though God is already giving the nation land and he's giving the nation success and prosperity, God is clearly trying to bring them into a future that's better than anything they could design for themselves. And yet, Achan sees the gold and the silver and the stuff, and he says, I coveted them. I let my desire tell me that those things were more valuable than my obedience to God. And the result is that God's judgment is brought on Achan. Now, the end of the story, I'm going to read it or show you in transparency, but the end of the story is weird to our modern sensibilities, because when God brings judgment on Achan, the people literally stone him to death and that he dies. The reason for that is because it is the people's way of telling God, of signifying to God, we don't want any impurity or any unholiness in our midst. We want to be a pure people because they understand the contract. In order for us to become everything that God has called us to do, we have to get rid of the sin in our midst. And then here is how the story ends. These are the last line of chapter 7. After they get rid of the sin, it says, the Lord turned from his fierce anger, and therefore that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since. Marina, you can come on up and play the keys. Notice that line at the beginning, the Lord turned from his fierce anger. The anger of God is something we don't talk a lot about, but it's very prevalent in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. There are hundreds of references to God being angry, and the reason for that is because God is portrayed as a God of justice and righteousness. God gets angry at things like sin and injustice and evil and immorality because he understands the destruction it causes. If you can imagine yourself in a situation where you were attacked or assaulted, and there were other people nearby who just watched it happen and provided no support, we would all conclude those people don't care about justice. Those people don't care about protecting someone who was wronged, which is why all throughout the Old Testament, we find instances kind of like this story with Achan, where someone commits an injustice, someone sins, and God actually brings judgment on them there in the moment. Sometimes he does it to people or communities or sometimes entire nations. And if you remember, that's what God is trying to do with the nation of Israel and the people in the land of Canaan. He is trying to use them to punish the injustice and the violence of these other nations. But what happens in chapter 7 is a foreshadowing of what's going to continue to happen throughout the rest of the Bible, which is the people God called to represent him suck at representing him. And they get caught up in the same cycle of sin and deceit and evil that all the other nations do. Which is why there was a prophet who lived a little while after the time of Joshua. His name was Isaiah. And he reasoned, or he thought about the fact that God was going to have to figure something out, because God's people could not live up to the calling that he had placed on them. So Isaiah prayed and he kind of wrestled with how could God move forward with bringing justice and judging evil, while at the same time being the compassionate and gracious God that he claims to be. And Isaiah concluded that what Israel as a nation could not do, someone else would have to do. That someone else would have to take the place of the nation so that God could be both just and righteous while also being compassionate and forgiving. And Isaiah was actually so confident about this that he wrote about it as if it was in the past tense. Here's what he said. We'll put it on the screen. He prophesied that there would be a man, and this man would take the place of the people. And he said this, he, talking about this man, he was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Yet it was our weaknesses that he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, and he was crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be made whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. All of us like sheep have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own, yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. And if you fast forward a couple hundred years after Isaiah wrote this and kind of prophesied, Jesus would show up on the scene and he would live that sinless, perfect life. You look at all the biographies of Jesus, no one talks about him sinning. No one talks about him committing the bad thing or the selfish thing. You see him committing the selfless thing every single time. And then you still see him dying the sinner's death on the cross. Which is to say that Achan, in Joshua chapter 7, Achan died for the sins that he committed. But what we see in Jesus is we see someone who died for the sins that we committed. That in Jesus, we're actually supposed to recognize both the righteousness and the justice of God, that he punishes evil, that he judges, and that he brings to account injustice, while at the same time providing a way for humanity to be forgiven and to continue becoming the people he destined them to be.